Hi, welcome to the Knitting Expat podcast, although this really isn't a podcast episode, this is more of a tutorial. My name is Mina and I'm here with you today to hopefully show you how to do the basics of two-colour brioche. And if you are a viewer of the podcast, then thank you, but if you are, you'll have seen that recently I have designed a two-colour brioche shawl, and you can see the two versions of them here. This is the original version, which is a more symmetrical shaped triangle, the way it comes out. It's knit on the bias, and you can see here this is what in the pattern is referred to as the right side, and this is referred to as the wrong side. And as you can see, brioche is a fully reversible stitch, and it gives a really soft, squishy fabric. And the two-colour version gives a really fun opportunities to play with colour. And the second version is a more asymmetrical version. I'm sorry if you hear any noise in the background, my cats are in the room with me. They get really angry if I close the door on them, so I can't help it. But the second version is more asymmetrical, and I took the opportunity to stripe and play with some scraps of leftover yarns to make up this fun pattern. And again, you can see one side, this side again in the pattern is what's referred to as the right side, and this is the wrong side. But again, with brioche there is no real right or wrong side, it's just whichever side you fancy. Yeah, and today's video is going to be all about two-colour brioche. So, and two-colour brioche has worked ever so slightly differently to single-colour brioche, but there is already several really good videos for one-colour brioche and how to knit that stitch. So I will include links in the description box to those videos for you if you are interested in one-colour brioche only. So, with two-colour brioche, every side of the work that you knit is effectively knit twice. So what I will use throughout this video and what other patterns and tutorials that I've seen use is the term two passes. So you knit each row twice, so you pass through that row twice. So what it feels like is that you knit two rows for every row that appears on each side of the fabric that you are knitting. So I'll show you this little sample piece here. So to knit this row, you knit it once with your main colour, and then you go back and you knit it again with your contrast colour. We'll talk a bit more about that later. Some brioche patterns and tutorials use the terms light colour and light side and dark colour and dark side to differentiate between the front and back of the work with two colours. However, I find I prefer using the terms right side, wrong side, main colour and contrast colour, as these, to me anyway, and I feel for many others, is an easier way to deal with it, as I imagine most of us knitters will be used to using these terms from other knitting patterns, and also because depending on your colour choices, which yarn you choose and what yarns you choose, your main colour yarn might not be the lighter yarn. You may have like a dark charcoal black as your main colour and a really light speckled yarn as your contrast colour. So using light side, dark side, or light colour, dark colour doesn't always necessarily make the right sense. Which is why I use wrong side, right side, wrong side, main colour and contrast colour, because that doesn't really, in my opinion, causes less confusion, but you know, other patterns deal with it differently. So the reason why you work each row twice, and I'll show you again on the sample piece, the reason why you work each row twice before turning is because you actually only knit half the stitches on each pass, and the other half of the stitches are slipped. So for example, on this row, the first row that I will knit now, I will only be knitting in the cream colour. So any of the blue stitches in the middle that are without a yarn over, I'll talk about that in a second. So I'll only be knitting the cream stitches, and the other half of the stitches will be slipped. So when you go back and knit the row a second time with your contrast colour, or in this case the blue, you only knit the blue stitches and the cream stitches are slipped. So you only really knit the stitches once, but you do it in two goes. I hope that makes some sense. For this method to work, you will need to use circular needles or DPNs, as I've shown here, because once you've worked a row, you will need to slide your stitches back to the start to knit that row again. So traditional straight needles are not practical for two-colour brioche. You should know that if you're going to be knitting a project where the size of your finished garment actually is going to be important, i.e. if it's a hat, a sweater, or some other kind of fitted accessory, and there is brioche involved, then it is vital that you swatch with your yarn and needles of choice. The reason is that brioche fabric is naturally much looser, and your gauge will naturally be significantly looser than it is in regular knitting, because the fabric is so stretchy and so springy. I mean, you see how much that stretches, and so yeah, so you need to really check your gauge if size matters. For these two shawls and this pattern in particular, size is not very important at all. It is a shawl after all, and whatever size needles you choose to use, you will still get a pretty large shawl at the end of the day. So it's, you know, I don't actually list a gauge on this pattern because it really doesn't matter. And as long as you are enjoying the fabric you are getting, then by all means continue with the needles you have chosen. I'm going to run you quickly through some of the brioche techniques and the stitches and what they actually mean. And then I will show you the actual combos of how to do the brioche stitch. So I figure it's actually probably going to be easier for me to just show you how as I explain the abbreviations, to show you how it's worked. So the first abbreviation we are going to talk about is the brioche knit, or the bark stitch. It is abbreviated as BRK in most patterns. So to work a bark stitch, I'm just going to use that term, you just knit the stitch with its corresponding yarn over. So in this instance you see that this is the column of knit stitches and it has a yarn over. So this action of knitting the knit stitch with its yarn over is called a bark stitch, or a brioche knit. And see that again here, just knit the knit stitch with its yarn over. Where it calls for in the pattern, that is what you do. I'm just showing that to you as an example here so you can see what that stitch looks like. Okay, let's get to the end of the row here. And then the next stitch I'm going to show you is the Brioche Purl, or the Burp stitch. And that, as it sounds, is, if you haven't already guessed, is you purl the purl stitches. So on this side the purl stitches are in the contrast colour, so that's the ones in the groove. You purl the purl stitch with its yarn over, and that is a burp stitch. Purl with its yarn over, and that's the burp. Okay, so the slip-on yarn over is a technique that some people have difficulty getting their heads around, but it really is quite simple once you understand the mechanism of how it works. The slip-on yarn over action creates the slip stitch with the corresponding yarn over. So in this case you'll see that here. There's a yarn over with a stitch that was slipped on the previous row. And this is what gives brioche its appearance and creates the amazingly swishy fabric. Sometimes this stitch is referred to as a shawled stitch. So you can see here that the column of knit stitches, if I spread this out, the column of knit stitches has, it almost looks like a shawl of the contrast of the main colour going behind the contrast colour on this side, and on this side the column of knit stitches in the main colour, and you'll see the contrast colour goes around the back of it, and it looks almost like a shawl. So it's sometimes referred to as a shawled stitch. This stitch combo is worked differently for a bark row than for a burp row or pass. But one thing always remains standard is you have to make sure that the working yarn is always in the front of your work before you slip the stitch. That is the main crux of this technique. On a burp row, the working yarn is already at the front of your work by the very nature of the fact that you're purling. So we're starting on a purl row on this side. So I will get into position and show you how that works. So see, we're coming up to a slip stitch, well, a slip-on yarn over. Your yarn is already at the front, so you slip the stitch and you yarn over, like you do when you yarn over on a purl in regular knitting. And so I will show you that again here. So yarn's already at the front, you slip, yarn over. Yarn at the front, slip, yarn over. Yarn at front, slip, yarn over. Yarns at the front, slip, yarn over. Okay, I hope that makes sense. But on a bark row, so when you're knitting your stitches, you have to move the yarn to the front of the work first, because the yarn is naturally at the back because it's a knit row or a bark row. So to do a slip-on yarn over on a bark row, you have to bring your yarn to the front first, slip, and then just take it to the back, like when you do a yarn over on a normal knit row in knitting. You just hold it to the back and then you just knit the next row, and then that creates your yarn over. So yarn to the front, slip, and then you work the next stitch, which is a bark stitch, and you get the yarn over there. Okay, so that's how the slip-on yarn over works on a bark row. You need to make sure that you bring your yarn to the front, like you're doing a yarn over in knitting. Slip, and then bark. Okay. So, I have shown you how to do the bark stitch, the burp stitch, slip-on yarn over following on a bark row, slip-on yarn over on a burp row. So I hope all of that makes sense. All of these stitches and the methods to do them are described in detail in the abbreviations section of the pattern for my shawl, and also any other good brioche pattern will have the abbreviations detailed out clearly for you. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions about any of this in the comment section below. Okay, so now I'm going to run you through how to knit two colour brioche and what the rows are. So like I said, it's a 2-row repeat, but each row is knit twice, so written down it looks like 4 rows. So we have row 1A, which is a bark row in your main colour. So after following the setup rows as indicated in whichever pattern that you are following, I've decided not to show the setup rows here because those are different. The setup row may be different depending on what pattern you're using, so please make sure you read the pattern. So this little swatch piece has a selvage edge, so there's a knit stitch in the main colour at either end. So you just knit the first stitch, regular knit stitch, nothing special. Then you do a slip-on yarn over. So if you remember on a bark row, you've got to bring your yarn to the front, slip, and hold yarn at the back, and then bark. So you're knitting the knit stitch with its yarn over. Then you do slip 1, yarn over, bark 1, 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 slip 1, yarn over, and then just knit the last stitch. So then slide it back to the beginning or the other end of the needle to knit the same side a second time. And so with your contrast colour in the front, you slip the first stitch, and that's your selvage. Then you burp 1, so that's purling the purl stitch with its yarn over. Then slip 1, yarn over, your yarn's already at the front of the work, so you slip the stitch, yarn over. And then burp, slip the stitch, yarn over, burp, slip the stitch, yarn over, burp, slip the stitch, yarn round the needle, burp, slip, yarn over, burp. Again, it took quite a rhythm with that. until the last stitch, and then you just slip the last stitch, and then you just leave that contrast yarn hanging at the front. You turn your work now to work the wrong side. So that was the right side. Now we're working the wrong side where the knit stitches are in your contrast colour. On a purl row, you purl with your main colour and you knit with your contrast colour. So you purl the first stitch, it's your selvage, then you do a slip one, yarn over, burp one, then you see your yarn's already at the front, so you slip one, yarn over, burp one, slip one, yarn over, burp one, slip, yarn over, burp, slip, yarn over, burp, slip, yarn over, burp, slip, yarn over, knit, but sorry, just purl the last stitch, which is your selvage. Slide work back to the other end of the needle, and then slip the first stitch, which is your selvage. Then you bark. You're knitting the contrast colour with its main colour yarn over. Then you bring your yarn to the front to do a slip one, yarn over. Then you bark, slip one, yarn over, 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 and bark. And then you slip the last stitch and you leave the contrast colour hanging at the back. So whenever you finish a row, leave the yarn that you just finished with hanging on the side that it's on naturally. Don't move it to the front or to the back. Leave it where it is, otherwise you will you'll get a weird sort of like transfer of colour when you've put the yarn on the wrong side. And then you turn and you're ready to work the right side again. So just a couple of other little bits of information. This swatch, and in the shawl pattern you will be adding, there will be a selvage stitch added at either side, and this gives you a nice sort of finished edge on your piece of brioche. And you work, in this swatch I've worked with an odd number of stitches. So yeah, there we go. That is the basics of how to knit two-colour brioche. If you would like to knit a swatch along with me, I will just tell you that you cast on your number of stitches. In this case I think I have 15 stitches on my needles. Once you've cast on your stitches, the first row that you knit is, I will have instructions in the box below for how to do the, just a simple 2-row, or the 2 sides of brioche, rows 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. And all you do for the first row, for row 1A, like I showed you, it was knit 1, slip 1 yarn over, bark 1, slip 1 yarn over, bark 1. The first row you do would be just slip 1 yarn over, knit 1, slip 1 yarn over, knit 1, and then the rest would follow in the brioche pattern. And that will just be described in the box below, so if you want to knit along with me, you can. So now I'm just going to run through a couple more rows just to show you, so you can see how it's worked, and I will tell you what row I am knitting, so if you want to follow along, you can. So we're going to start with row 1A, and this is a right side main colour row. So knit 1, slip 1 yarn over, bark, slip 1 yarn over, bark. Okay, so that's that first row done. Slide it right to the end, and then we're going to knit a row 1B, that is right side contrast colour. So slip the first stitch and then burp, slip 1 yarn over, 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 burp, slip one, yarn over, burp, all the way to the last stitch, and then you just slip the last stitch and turn your work to work the wrong side. So now we are knitting row 2A, wrong side, main colour. So you purl the first stitch, then slip one, yarn over, purl one, burp one, sorry, slip one, yarn over, burp, 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 all the way to the last stitch, and you just purl the last stitch. So that's that row finished, and you slide it back to the beginning. Then we're going to work row 2B, that is wrong side, contrast colour, sorry. Slip the first stitch, and something I forgot to mention is with brioche you always slip purlwise unless otherwise stated. There are a couple of stitches, I'm trying to think, specifically there's a decrease which involves slipping stitches knitwise, but when you're knitting just plain brioche, always slip purlwise. The pattern will tell you when and where you will need to slip knitwise, otherwise you always slip purlwise. So you slip the first stitch, then it's a bark stitch, yarn over, slip one, bark, yarn over, slip one, bark, or slip one, yarn over, bark, slip one, yarn over, bark, slip one, yarn over, all the way to the end, and then you slip the last stitch and turn, and you're ready to work the right side again. Okay, I hope that makes some sense for you. Okay, now I'm quickly going to show you just some tips and tricks on how you can fix your mistakes in brioche. Now I'm going to put it out there and say that if this is your first time knitting brioche and you're knitting anything other than a small swatch like this, please use a lifeline. Lifelines will really help you out if you're new to a technique, new to anything in knitting, and honestly they're just good practice. I have been guilty of not using lifelines myself, however they do serve a purpose, and if you are worried about making a mistake and you don't want to try and rip out and pick up stitches in brioche, which is really quite difficult sometimes and can be tricky, it's not impossible, it's just tricky, then I highly recommend you use a lifeline. And one other tip is if you're new to brioche, use wooden or bamboo needles. Don't use metal or very slick needles. The extra grip will be helpful. So I'm just going to show you some of the common, well, one of the most common mistakes in brioche is when you come to a stitch and then somehow the yarn over falls off like that. So then you come to knit the stitch, and then if you keep going past it, you end up, where did that go? Yeah, that dropped yarn over, I'll show you here, on the other side, falls down and doesn't sit around the collar of that stitch correctly. So you see that? So I'm just going to tink back really quickly to show you how to. So yeah, all you would have to do in that instance is if you notice on the row that you've done it, then you can tink back and then all you need to do is you just need to pick up the yarn over. If you drop the yarn over, the best thing to do is to try and pick it up at the time when it happens. So for example, if I drop this yarn over here and I can see that the stitch I'm about to knit doesn't have its yarn over, so I know I've dropped it, so I just need to pick it up, pop it back onto the stitch and knit it together in the bark stitch. That's the most common mistake in brioche I find, is you just drop the yarn over by mistake, because if your needles are a bit slick or you're getting a bit of momentum going, or if you're tired. I find I make the most mistakes in my knitting when I'm tired. Another mistake in knitting that I will show you is probably a more scary one, and that is if you drop a stitch in brioche. I mean, dropping a stitch in your knitting, if it's your first time, can be quite scary in and of itself. But if you say drop a stitch in brioche and it runs down a couple of rows, what do you do? How do you fix that? That looks like a mess, right? Okay, so first things first, don't panic. What I do is I push my right hand needle through a little bit, so that hangs there and it doesn't go anywhere. I'm not going to drop any more stitches from that needle. Then I grab a spare needle. You can use a crochet hook if you are more comfortable with that. I prefer just using another needle, either the same size or slightly smaller. Now if you've dropped a purl stitch, in this case I dropped a knit stitch, but if you dropped a purl stitch, I find it is much easier if you turn the work and try to fix your mistake from the knit side. It is so much easier to see what you are doing from the knit side. So what I do first is I just go in and I pick up the last stitch that I can find. Okay, so once I've got that secure, I know I'm not going to lose any more stitches. Then I sort of examine and see what I've got going on here. So this is the yarn over for this purl stitch up here. Then you can see these two go together, and then there's this one. So this must have been the yarn over for this stitch. Okay. Trying to see how this works now to get this right. So then when you come by, you will be knitting the knit stitch with its yarn over. So then you pick up the main colour, which is what your knit stitch is in, and then you pass the knit stitch and its yarn over, try and keep that out of the way, over that knit stitch. Then you pick up its yarn over for the new knit stitch now, and this would be what it was. This is the main colour, so this is what it's knit with, and you pass the two colours over that. Be careful not to take the yarn over off your burp stitch. Then you pop that back onto your needle, and it's a little bit loosey-goosey at this point, but it will tighten up, and then you're ready to go. And then you're back onto, then you've rescued your stitch. I hope that was clear. I'm not sure how clear that was. Okay, so I'm going to show you what to do if you drop a stitch again, but this time I'll drop a stitch on the wrong side. Then it drops down a few rows. Okay, so like I said, if you have dropped a burp stitch, it's much easier to turn your work to fix it where the drop stitch is the knit stitch. So I take a spare needle and pick up the last stitch that I can see, so that doesn't go anywhere. Then with your other needles, I push one out of the way, so it's up and just at the back and out of the way. Then with the strands that have been dropped, see here, this is the contrast colour with its main colour counterpart, so you can see that strand there is the collar for this stitch. So then the next blue strand is the collar for the stitch that I have grabbed here. Then you need to find the next cream stitch to knit this over. Okay, then you have your stitch with its collar. Then you need to pick up the next sort of loose blue strand to go with your cream. Then you knit that over the next cream stitch available, the loose strands. Then you pick up the blue, and that's the yarn over, and I think this is the last stitch, so just need to pop that back onto the needle. And don't worry so much if the orientation is correct at this point, you can fix that after. And so now that you've got that on, you can check, make sure every stitch in that column has its shawled stitch, its contrast colour. You can flip your work back over, Okay, well, I hope that was somewhat useful for you and that has helped you a little bit if you've had some questions about how to knit two-colour brioche and fixing some common mistakes. If you have any questions for me, if anything wasn't clear, please do let me know in the comments section below or in the thread for this video on the Ravelry group, which will be linked in the description box below. Please check the description box. I will have instructions for how to knit two-colour brioche, and also the setup row for knitting a swatch like this if you want to knit along with me. There will be links to other brioche tutorials, specifically a brioche tutorial for one-colour brioche, and also a list of the abbreviations that I've used for this tutorial. And yeah, please do let me know if you have any questions regarding this. I will try my best to answer them, and I hope that you have found this useful. Thank you very much for joining me. Bye.